Hello, everyone, and welcome to Silent Kane. I'm Kane, your guide through stories of mystery, danger, and the hidden truths of the underworld. Let's begin today's case. Some cities breathe, Blackwater doesn't. It chokes that it's a place where hope gets traded for a bottle of cheap whiskey, where the only law is written in shadows, and where every man carries a knife behind his smile. The rain falls every night, heavy and red like the city's conscience bleeding out. People say it's just the light, just a trick of the eye. But Silas Kane knows better. Every drop carries a secret. Every storm hides a crime that he's no savior. He's no saint, but he can see the pattern in the chaos and in Blackwater that makes him the most dangerous man alive. This is not a story about justice. It's a story about truth and the price it demands. This is Silas Kane and the Crimson Rain. The city of Blackwater had a way of soaking a man's bones with rot. Even the rain carried the stink of sin, grease, blood, smoke. It didn't wash the streets clean, it painted them dirtier. And tonight it fell hard, hammering the neon signs until their colors bled into the gutters like veins of a dying beast. Silas Kane lit a cigarette beneath the glowing letters of a club called Paradise Lost. The sign flickered red, casting his face in alternating shades of hellfire and ice. He stood still, trench coat collar high, the ember of his cigarette the only warmth in the storm. He had been called out of bed an hour earlier, and as usual, trouble hadn't bothered to wait for him to be ready. Inside the club, the air was thick with cigar smoke and sweat, even though the place was nearly empty. A body drew silence like a magnet, and the corpse in the back room had already pulled every whisper out of the building. Detective Harlan Briggs leaned in the doorway, chewing on a dead cigar. His bulldog face wrinkled deeper when he saw Silas. Why they keep dragging you into these, I'll never understand. You ain't a cop, Kane. You ain't on payroll. Just a private bloodhound sniffing where he don't belong. Silas ignored him. He had long ago learned that Briggs's bark was only habit, not hostility. He moved into the room where the victim sat propped against the wall, legs sprawled, chin dipped like he had nodded off mid-sentence. Only the neat, round hole in the forehead ruined the picture. Blood had streaked down the man's face in two symmetrical trails, now drying against pale skin. Silas crouched. His eyes moved the way other men's hands did, probing, measuring, prying. The suit was fine wool tailored, too fine for this side of town. Italian shoes, soles hardly worn. Fingers manicured, though one nail showed a faint line of powder residue. He filed that away. The man used cocaine, but carefully, sparingly. Not a gutter addict. A high-class indulgence. Robbery, Briggs said behind him. Guy was probably stupid enough to flash his cash around the bar. Some junkie plugs him, takes his wallet, and runs. Silas spoke without turning. No, watch is still on his wrist. Wallet's still in his jacket. The shooter wasn't after money. He touched the wrist gently with gloved fingers. Patek Philippe, golden face. Still ticking. A man doesn't kill clean between the eyes for spare change. This was personal or professional. Briggs grunted, shifting his weight. Professional hit, then. Silas finally looked up, cigarette balanced on his lip. His eyes were gray, steady, the color of storms before they broke. Professional, yes, but not flawless. He leaned closer to the corpse, nose a breath from the collar. A faint smear of crimson, darker, thicker than the blood from the gunshot. He inhaled carefully. Perfume, jasmine, smoky, expensive. He closed his eyes for a second, cataloging it in his mind the way other men filed receipts that he spoke slowly, each word like chalk across a board. The victim was close to someone, inches close. A woman, by the perfume. She brushed him, maybe even touched him, moments before he died. Her presence lingered here longer than the killer's bullet. Briggs's cigar tilted. So a dame. And it always. Not just a dame, Silas corrected, standing, exhaling smoke that curled into the hanging light. The dame. The kind men kill for, and the kind men die beside. Find her, and you'll find the truth. Briggs shook his head. Truth don't pay bills, Kane. But corpses keep you in business, I guess. The bartender was giving statements to two uniforms when Silas drifted back to the front room. He watched the man pour whiskey into glasses. The tremor in his hand wasn't fear. Fear made men stiff, clumsy. This was anticipation, guilt, the weight of having already spoken a lie. Silas moved close, his voice soft enough that the uniforms didn't notice. The glass shakes because you're holding more than whiskey. You've already lied once tonight. Careful. You pour too many lies, and the glass will crack in your hand. The bartender's eyes widened. I don't know nothing, mister. Juste pour drink. That's all. But Silas caught the flicker in his pupils, the way they darted to the side when the word nothing left his mouth. It meant the opposite. He knew something, or someone, and he was terrified of speaking her name. Silas filed it away, gave the man a nod, and slipped back out into the night. Back in his office, the rain drummed steady on the window. The third floor above a pawn shop wasn't glamorous, but it gave Silas a view of Blackwater's heartless veins. Neon spilled across the wet streets. Broken glass glittered in alleys, and every shadow seemed heavy with secrets. He poured rye whiskey into a chipped glass and drank it slow. The taste was fire and regret. On his desk lay stacks of case files, each one a scar from another life. His hand drifted to the drawer he rarely opened. He slid it out, revealing a folder bound in cracked leather, label faded but legible. The Crimson Rain murders he set on the desk, staring at it the way a man stares at an old wound. 5 years ago, a string of killings that rattled the city. Each victim bore not only a bullet, but a trace of blood that wasn't their own. The press called it Crimson Rain because it seemed to fall across Blackwater like a storm, random and merciless. Silas had worked the edges of the case back then, unofficially. Too close, too deep. He remembered the nights, the shadows, the perfume that haunted the scenes. And then, sudden silence. The killing stopped. The storm passed, or so it seemed, until tonight. The smell of jasmine and smoke on the corpse's collar clawed at him. It wasn't just coincidence. It was a calling card. The Crimson Rain had returned. Silas poured another drink, his hand steady though his chest felt hollow. He didn't fear death. He feared memory, because this wasn't just another case. This was the one that had never let him go. The following evening, Blackwater felt like it was holding its breath. Rain still poured in steady sheets, striking rooftops, sliding down gutters, turning alleyways into rivers of oil and filth. The city wasn't built for redemption. Its skyline was jagged like broken teeth, its streets veins that carried only poison. Silas Kane walked through it as if he belonged to the rain. His trench coat was soaked, but he carried himself without hurry, without hesitation. Men in doorways eyed him warily. Women leaned from windows with painted faces and weary smiles. Blackwater had a way of watching everyone, but Kane had mastered the art of watching back. His destination was the Black Dahlia Lounge, a place where deals were made in shadows, where jazz drowned out confessions, and where whispers carried more weight than bullets. If the corpse at Paradise Lost was the opening line of a story, the Black Dahlia was where he'd find the next chapter. Inside, smoke hung heavy in the air. A band played something slow and sultry, the trumpet crying out like a drunken prayer. The crowd was silk and shadows, men in expensive suits hiding knives in their smiles, women whose laughter was painted thicker than their lipstick. But to the center of it all stood Lillian Voss. She was the Black Dahlia incarnate. Red hair falling in perfect waves, lips as sharp as a blade, eyes green enough to make a man forget how to breathe. Her presence demanded attention, but her voice, when she spoke, drew men in like moths to flame. Silas had known her before, too well, and too poorly. She caught sight of him immediately. Her smile was a weapon, curved and precise. Silas Kane, she purred, leaning across the polished bar, as if gravity bowed for her. The rain always drags you back, doesn't it? He ordered whiskey, neat, and let the silence stretch before answering. Rain doesn't drag me. It just shows where the stains never washed out. Her laugh was low, musical, dangerous. And here I thought you came because you missed me. Silas studied her face, the way her eyes lingered a fraction too long when she smiled. He read micro-expressions like other men read headlines. Beneath the charm, there was tension, worry, maybe even fear. You heard about the body, he said flatly. Her smile faltered just for a heartbeat before sliding back into place. News travels fast when bullets fly. Paradise Lost, wasn't it? Fitting name. Silas sipped his drink, never breaking eye contact. Fitting, yes, but the signature's back. Blood on the collar that wasn't his. Perfume. Jasmine with smoke. For the first time, Lillian's eyes hardened. Just a flicker, but Silas caught it. He always caught it. You're chasing ghosts, Kane, she whispered, voice suddenly colder. The crimson rain is dead. Gone. Don't dig it up. You'll drown. Silas leaned in, his voice low, steady, surgical. Rain doesn't die, Lillian. It falls. And when it falls on everyone. Sooner or later, it'll find you too. She set his glass down harder than necessary, the sound sharp against the jazz. You should walk away. You never learned how to stop bleeding for the truth. But Silas had already seen what he needed. The tightening of her jaw, the faint tremor in her hand as she reached for another bottle. Lillian Voss knew more than she'd ever admit. She was bound to the crimson rain, maybe as a witness, maybe as a survivor, maybe as something worse. Silas left the lounge past midnight. The rain hadn't eased. It hammered harder, drenching the streets in neon blood. The city seemed to pulse with menace, its lights blurred in the storm. He lit another cigarette, walking without urgency, though every sense was alert. The rhythm of footsteps behind him was steady, too steady. Not the stagger of a drunk, not the shuffle of a beggar. Someone was following. Silas turned into a side street. The alley swallowed him whole, shadows wrapping him like an old coat. He walked halfway down, stopped, and waited. The follower entered. A big man, broad shoulders under a dark coat. He moved with a predator's silence, knife glinting faintly under the streetlight. Silas let him come close. At the last second, he spun, grabbing the man's wrist, twisting hard until the knife clattered against wet concrete. He slammed the man into the wall, voice low sharp. Who sent you? The man sneered through the rain. His breath was foul, his eyes burning with fanatic certainty. Crimson rain falls for everyone, Kane. Even you. Before Silas could strike again, the man bit down. His jaw snapped like a trap. Foam spilled from his lips, eyes rolling back. He convulsed, then collapsed at Silas's feet, cyanide. A suicide pill. The rain washed white froth and crimson spit into the gutter. Neon bled across the puddles, painting the corpse in shades of red. Silas stood over him, cigarette burning low in his hand. He exhaled, eyes narrowing. The crimson rain wasn't just back. It was already hunting. The alley was silent again, except for the rain, pounding the pavement with relentless fury. Silas Kane crouched beside the dead man. His face was locked in its usual stillness, but his mind was moving like quicksilver as he tilted the corpse's jaw open. Cyanide crystals left traces, a faint burn around the gums, the sharp chemical tang mixing with the sourness of rain and bile. The man had been trained. He carried the poison in a capsule designed to break fast, instant enough to deny Silas a single answer. But there was something else. The man's shoes, practical, military issue, polished despite the mud. His nails were clipped short, uniform. His hands bore calluses across the palms, not from tools but from gripping a weapon. Ex-military, probably hired muscle, but disciplined. Not a drunk street thug. And on his wrist, a faint mark. A ring-shaped impression, pale against his skin. He had recently worn a watch or a bracelet, but it was missing, removed before the fight, perhaps by his employers. A precaution or a signature. Silas cataloged it all. Every fragment, every silence, every absence. Crimson rain falls for everyone, Kane. Even you. The words replayed in his head. That wasn't the threat of a thug. It was doctrine. It carried the weight of a creed, something larger than the man who had died in the gutter. Silas lit another cigarette, letting the smoke mix with the chemical stench. He looked down at the corpse with a kind of detached pity. You swallowed your truth too fast, friend. But truth always leaks through the cracks. I'll find yours. He left the body for the city sanitation. Blackwater had a way of cleaning its messes without paperwork. Back in his office, dawn crept in like a thief. Pale light slipped through the blinds, weak and gray, unable to banish the night's filth. Silas hadn't slept. The cigarette smoke in his office hung so thick it blurred the edges of the room. On his desk lay the old file again. The Crimson Rain murders. He spread the photos across the scarred wood. Bodies from half a decade ago, each killed cleanly, each smeared with blood that didn't belong. A crimson mark, a silent message. The city had called it random. The cops had called it unsolvable. Silas had called it unfinished. Now it was starting again. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, fingers steepled. His mind replayed every detail of the last 24 hours. The corpse at Paradise Lost, the jasmine perfume, Lillian Voss's flicker of fear, the bartender's trembling hand, the assassin with cyanide teeth. Each clue was a raindrop. Alone, meaningless. Together, a storm.by mid-morning, Briggs arrived, smelling of stale cigar smoke and cheap cologne. He barged in without knocking, tossed his hat on Silas's desk, and collapsed into the chair opposite. You hear about the stiff they found on dockside? Briggs grunted. Same deal. Execution style. No witnesses. And get this, blood on the collar. Not his. Silas didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes told Briggs he had already known. Briggs frowned. You're telling me this is the same as your old Crimson Rain ghost story? Huh? Thought that case was buried deeper than a priest's sins. Silas's voice was calm, precise. Buried things don't stay buried in Blackwater. The ground is too shallow. The rain washes them up again. Briggs sighed, rubbing his face. If you're right, we're in for a bad season. Silas poured him a drink without asking. They sat in silence a while, the city groaning outside like an old beast. That evening, Silas walked the streets again. Blackwater at night was a different creature. Neon pulsing like diseased arteries. Alleys whispering with rats and broken men. He let the city talk to him. It always did, if you listen hard enough. On Galloway Avenue. He stopped before a newsstand. Headlines screamed another unsolved murder. Police baffled. The ink was still wet, bleeding under the rain. Silas bought a paper, scanning it under the streetlight. The details matched what Briggs had said. Another execution, another trace of alien blood. The city was already afraid. Fear had a smell, and Blackwater was beginning to reek of it again. As Silas folded the paper, a shadow leaned near the stand. A boy, no more than 12, cap pulled low, face dirty. One of the city's errant kids, living off scraps and secrets. Mr. Kane, the boy whispered, eyes darting. Lady sent me. Said to give you this. He held out an envelope, damp from rain. Silas took it, flipped the boy a coin, and watched him vanish into the crowd like smoke. The envelope carried no name, only a faint trace of perfume. Jasmine, edged with smoke. Silas opened it under the streetlight. Inside was a single line, written in crimson ink. The rain remembers you. He stood there a long time, cigarette burning down between his fingers, the words bleeding into his mind. The crimson rain was back, and it hadn't just returned for the city, that IT had returned for him. The envelope lay on Silas Kane's desk like a threat dressed in silk. The rain remembers you. The words were written in crimson ink that bled slightly into the paper, as if the letters themselves were weeping. And the faint trace of jasmine still lingered, Clinging to the fibers like a ghost, he stared at it while the city outside his window moaned with the usual chorus: sirens, thunder, the occasional gunshot muffled by distance. His cigarette had burned down to ash, forgotten in his fingers. He set it in the tray, poured himself 2 fingers of rye, and let the fire settle into his chest. IT wasn't just a message. It was recognition. Whoever had written it didn't just know the Crimson Rain's methods. They knew him. The past clawed at the edges of his mind, memories he kept buried under layers of smoke and whiskey. Faces of the dead, a woman's laughter cut short, perfume and blood. He pushed it back down. Not now. WY noon the next day. Silas found himself walking through the industrial quarter. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the air still stank of rust and gasoline. Factories loomed like tombstones, windows shattered, machines silent since the city bled itself dry years ago. The second victim had been found here, dockside, near a warehouse abandoned by a shipping company that had long since fled Blackwater's decay. Briggs had given Silas the address, though not without a snarl about Kane stealing thunder from the boys in blue. The body had already been carted off, but Silas didn't need a corpse to see the truth. The warehouse was empty save for rain dripping through holes in the roof. The floor bore dark stains where the man had fallen, and chalk outlines the cops had left in their bureaucratic ritual. Silas knelt, fingertips hovering just above the ground. The rain hadn't washed everything. He saw faint drag marks, parallel lines that told him the victim hadn't died standing. He had been forced to his knees before the bullet. Execution, ritualistic. Beside the chalk outline was a smear on the floor, crimson again, but not pooled like the victim's blood. A smaller mark, as if wiped deliberately. Silas leaned closer, nose almost touching the damp concrete. The same perfume clung faintly. Jasmine. Smoke. She had been here too. The woman in smoke. He stood, scanning the warehouse. Broken glass glittered near a window. The shards told a story. They lay mostly outside, meaning the window had been broken from within. Someone had fled after the shot, shattering their way out instead of using the door. But why? The assassin was disciplined, even suicidal when caught. Panic wasn't part of the creed, which meant whoever escaped wasn't the assassin. A witness. Or the next target. Silas's eyes narrowed. He returned to the Black Dahlia Lounge that night. It was busier than before, the smoke thicker, the music louder. Lillian Voss stood where she always stood, behind the bar like a queen on her throne. Men bent toward her like supplicants. Women envied her with clenched teeth. When Silas slid onto a stool, she gave him a smile that was almost convincing. Back so soon, Kane? Careful. A man might think you're hooked. On whiskey, maybe. He tapped the bar. She poured without asking. You always come around when the city's bleeding. She leaned in, voice low. This time's no different, is it? Silas didn't answer. He watched her pour for another patron, her movements smooth, precise. But he saw the tension in her fingers, the stiffness in her shoulders when she thought no one was looking. Finally, he said, 2 bodies, both executions, both touched with blood that isn't theirs, both carrying your perfume. The glass in her hand froze. A hairline crack appeared as it met the counter too hard. She covered it with a smile. You always had a nose too sharp for your own good. Sharp noses keep men alive. He sipped, eyes on her. What's your connection to the Crimson Rain, Lillian? She leaned closer, her perfume enveloping him, smoke and jasmine mixing with whiskey. If I told you, Silas, you'd never sleep again. Not that you do now. You know something? More than you admit. Her smile thinned. And you, always chasing storms. You don't care if you drown as long as you get to name the thunder. Before he could reply, a commotion broke out near the door. 2 men in gray coats had entered, eyes sweeping the room with the focus of wolves. They weren't here for a drink. Lillian's face shifted just slightly, enough for Silas to read it. Fear. These weren't strangers. The men walked straight toward the bar. Silas stubbed his cigarette, body still, mind racing. The Crimson Rain had just walked into the Black Dahlia. The two men in gray coats cut through the lounge like blades parting a curtain. They didn't hurry, but their presence tuned the room to silence. Conversations clipped mid-word, the saxophone stumbling over a sour note before the musician recovered. Smoke curled around lamps and cheekbones. Gold cufflinks glittered like teeth. The Black Dahlia was used to wolves, but not these wolves. Silas Kane watched from his stool, posture loose, gaze precise. One man was tall and narrow, his jaw notched by a fine white scar that flashed under the chandelier. The other was thick through the shoulders, a block of meat shaped by discipline. Their hands hung close to their coats in a way that said holsters, not pockets. Their eyes moved like scopes. They weren't here for him. Not first. Their attention slid along the bar and fixed on Lillian Voss. Behind polished mahogany, Lillian set down a bottle with theatrical ease. Her mouth smiled, her eyes did not. Even with her training, masking fear under lacquer and lipstick, something tightened in the small muscles near her eyes. A flicker. Silas filed it away. She knew them. She feared them. "Evening, miss," said the scarred one, his voice soft enough to make the softness itself unsettling. "Our employer would like a word." "This is a place for music," she said evenly, keeping her hands visible. "Not for business." "Where we come from," the heavy one replied, leaning in, "business is the only music that plays." Silas crushed the last of his cigarette to ash and stood, not a threat, just a change in geometry. "She's pouring drinks," he said. "Try waiting like the rest." Both men turned, the scarred one's mouth crookedition. "And you are?" "Thirsty," Silas said. The heavy one's knuckles tensed, a little tug at the coat where a shoulder rig lived. Lillian cut across them before motion found muscle. "He's nobody," she said with practiced disdain. "Leave him. I'll go." Her eyes flicked to Silas for a fraction, an infinitesimal semaphore. "Don't," which in this city meant do. Scarjaw clamped a hand around her forearm. The pressure would leave a bruise the shape of his fingers. The inhalation she couldn't stop was all Silas needed. Terror, not theater. The calculation happened without occupying space on his face. Two men, both armed, crowd useless, door far, back hall narrow. Fire suppression? None. Whiskey spill on the bar. Yes. He flipped his lighter open. Flame budded like a wicked thought. The little tongue of fire kissed the slick of whiskey and raced along the counter in a bright, hungry belt. Patrons shouted and reeled. The band coughed to a stop. Lillian jerked away in the instant of surprise. Silas raked his heavy rocks glass across Scarjaw's wrist. Bones thudded against wood. The grip broke. The heavy swung, but shock made him slow. Silas slipped the punch and drove a shoulder into his ribs, sending him staggering into the newborn flames. They regrouped with professional speed. Scarjaw had a pistol out in the space of a heartbeat, muzzle black and steady. Lillian's hand flashed beneath the bar. She came up with a small revolver, and for a beat Silas thought she'd shoot to kill. Instead, she snapped a round into the chandelier. Glass detonated, raining diamonds. The room screamed and scattered, smoke and sparks and crystal turning the floor treacherous. "Move," she hissed. They slipped through the service gap, down a corridor that smelled of citrus cleaner and fear. Footfalls pounded after them. Two pairs, sure and fast. At the end of the hall, a steel door waited with a rusted bolt. Lillian fired once. The lock shattered. Rain punched their faces as they burst into the alley. Outside, the storm worked like a camouflage net. Neon bled into puddles, painting the world arterial red. Lillian kept hold of Silas's sleeve and pulled him right, then left, then through a narrow dogleg between brickbacks of tenements. The gray coats followed with the patience of men who assumed they would arrive eventually. They weren't wrong. Patience kills as efficiently as bullets. They cut down a service lane, and Lillian yanked him into a shallow stairwell, sunk below street grade. The recess was slim and rank, crowded by a dumpster and a door no one had opened in years. They pressed into the cold, and waited. The gray coats thundered past in the rain, close enough to smell the wet wool. Only when the sounds thinned did Lillian loosen her hand. The revolver clattered to a knee, then steadied in her palm again. Her breath came fast and then steadied, too. A woman rebuilding control brick by brick. "You shouldn't have interfered," she whispered, rain threading her hair. "You sent a letter," Silas said, voice flat, not accusing. Perfumed to be sure he read it. "That's interference. I tried to warn you off. Warnings don't come wrapped in your scent unless they're meant to pull," he said. "Those men aren't street muscle. They're trained." "Who are they?" Her eyes searched his. A storm crossed her irises. Fear, defiance, calculation. He watched the tiny muscles around her mouth and the way her shoulders dropped 1 degree when she chose a truth that wouldn't kill her to speak. "They're not men in the way you mean," she said at last. "They're a liturgy with faces. They call themselves the Crimson Circle." Silas didn't react except to blink once, slow, as if matching a file to a shelf. "The Circle was a rumor," he said. "A morality tale for criminals." "Rumors are protection," she said. "They keep people from looking too closely." "The murders," he said. "The circles cut over the heart. The perfume. That's doctrine, not fashion." She nodded, the motion barely there. "Doctrine. Ritual. A way to keep the people inside obedient and the city outside terrified." His gaze flicked to the revolver, then back to her face. "You knew their moves in the bar." It wasn't an accusation, just geometry again. Proofs laid end to end, a beat. Rain ticked on the dumpster lid like a metronome counting down to confession. "I used to know everything," she said. The sentence nested inside itself. Then and now, knowledge and exile. The truth cost visible currency. He watched her pay. She straightened in the stairwell's gloom, choosing steel over shame. "I was one of them," she said. Silas held her eyes, looking not at theatrical contrition, but at micromotions, the blink rate, the tiny quiver in the right eyelid, the way her throat moved when swallowing a memory. He measured the distances between words. Nothing in her face said lie. "What does the circle want with you now?" "The same thing any cult wants with an apostate," she said. "A lesson that bleeds." The rain thickened. A car hissed by at the mouth of the lane and was gone. Silas glanced up the stairs, gauging angles, counting shadows. "How many?" he asked, her mouth flattened. "Enough." "Names?" She shook her head. "Names are knives. They cut whoever holds them." He didn't press. Names have a way of arriving unsummoned when a case turns the right corner. He stepped from a stairwell, looked both ways, then gestured. She followed, keeping close, revolver turned in her hand, so the barrel pointed down. Muscle memory, not invention. They moved through Blackwater's veins as if pursued by the city itself. Steam rose from grates, haloing their legs. Silas led, changing speeds intermittently to break the cadence of a trackable stride. Twice he paused at corners to observe, not the street, but reflections in the window glass. Angles you could see but couldn't be seen through. No gray coats. Not yet. 3 blocks later, he cut into a service corridor disguised as a dead end. It wasn't. A chain-link gate stood, wired open and forgotten. They slipped through and emerged 2 streets over into a quieter slice of night, where neon failed to penetrate and the rain sounded like a confession being whispered straight into the earth. Lillian finally spoke. "Why help me?" He didn't answer at first. The question wasn't simple. He had reasons that were tactical and reasons that were human and reasons that had nothing to do with either. He said the only piece that fit the moment without lying. "Because whoever sent those men doesn't like witnesses. And you," she said, breath ghosting the air, "have never liked bullies." He didn't confirm. He didn't need to. The city already knew. They reached his building, a tired brick shoebox with its dignity chipped off. Inside, the stairwell smelled of boiled cabbage, dust, and old regrets. He unlocked the 3rd-floor door to his office room, flicked a switch. The bulb offered a thin yellow surrender. Lillian set the revolver on the desk, then on second thought kept it. She shifted from foot to foot like a dancer who could no longer hear the music. Silas shrugged out of his coat and hung it on a peg. Water dripped to the floor, ticking a small, stubborn clock. "Start at the beginning," he said. "What is the circle, really?" Her gaze traveled the room. Files stacked like gray gravestones, a window milky with rain, a couch that had known more insomnia than sleep. She realized there was nowhere to run to that wasn't this conversation. She took the chair across from him and folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "It's not a gang," she said. "It's an oath. People think contracts are paper. The circle writes theirs in blood." He sat, and for the first time since the lounge, his shoulders lowered. He listened the way surgeons cut, cleanly, without wasted motion. "They choose targets," she continued. "At first it felt selective. No innocence, no collateral. A myth that we were balancing scales in a city that would never balance itself. Then the rules moved. They always move. One night, an order came that didn't fit. The man wasn't a target. He was a symbol. I ran. They don't forgive that." He asked no questions for a long time. In the silence, the rain filled in the rest. "Names," he said again at last. She looked at the window instead of him. "I can give you one. Not a leader. A messenger. The one with the scar. He's called Cartervale. If you find him, you'll find a road." Silas filed it away. A road is as good as an address if you know the city. Outside, sirens braided the night. Somewhere far off, the Black Dahlia's fire bells chimed themselves hoarse. He rose. "You can sleep here," he said. "Door locks. Windows stick. It won't stop them long, but it makes a noise when they pry." She nodded once. The revolver rested in her lap, heavy as truth. She didn't ask why he trusted her enough to offer a couch or why he distrusted her enough to keep her in sight. In Blackwater, those two questions were the same. When she finally slept, hands near the weapon but not clenched around it, Silas stood at the window and watched the city try to drown itself. He didn't light a cigarette. He counted the intervals between lightning and thunder and used the numbers to sort facts in his stacks in his head. Two men in gray. Cartervale. Ritual circles carved shallow over the heart. Jasmine oil. Lillian's defection. A covenant pretending to be balance. And the sense, bright as neon, that the circle's weather system had formed with him at its warm center. He turned from the glass only when the rain shifted pitch. Dawn scraped a lighter shade onto the underbellies of the clouds, and with it came a fresh resolve, thin and sharp as a new blade. The crimson rain wasn't a story anymore. It was a schedule, and somewhere on that schedule, they had placed his name. The rain hadn't let up by morning. It came down in a relentless percussion, beating the city flat, drowning edges and corners until Blackwater looked like it had been washed with blood and left to drip dry. From Silas Kane's office window, rooftops bowed under the weight of water. The streets below carried reflections like open wounds. Lillian Voss stirred on his worn couch. Her hand remained curled near the revolver, as if she feared waking without it would mean waking dead. She didn't move right away, only opened her eyes slowly and measured the unfamiliar ceiling, then the rain-streaked glass, then the man standing near it. Silas hadn't slept. His body could mimic it for a few hours at a time, but his mind rarely gave him that luxury. He still wore his shirt from last night, sleeves rolled, collar open, tie abandoned somewhere near the door. His gaze wasn't on her, but on the city beyond, eyes narrowed as if he were listening to some private language carried by the storm. She spoke first, her voice rasped thin by smoke and adrenaline. "You stood watch all night." He didn't turn. They wouldn't hesitate to come through a lock. I wanted to hear it when they did. "You really think they'll come that fast?" "They already tried once," he said. "And patience isn't a circle virtue." Her silence stretched. Finally, she asked the question that had sat in her chest since the lounge. "Why didn't you leave me there? You don't even know me." "I know what fear looks like," Silas said. "Yours wasn't the kind that buys a ticket. It was the kind that comes stamped on the skin. People with that look don't walk out of bars alive." She swallowed, studying him in the thin light. His words weren't flattery. They were dissection. "You make me sound like evidence," she murmured. "You are," he said simply. "The circle left you alive, which means your message. Until I figure out why, you're part of the case." Something flickered in her expression. Anger, or maybe relief disguised as anger. She sat up, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. The revolver remained balanced on her thigh, casual and deliberate at once. "What now?" she asked. Silas finally faced her. His eyes were pale, tired, relentless. "Now you tell me what they'll do next. The circle doesn't miss twice without sending an army. Do they come with fire? Or do they wait with whispers until your name falls from every mouth in the city?" Her lips parted, but she hesitated. He saw it. Every pause, every glance downward, every fraction of a second where memory pressed too hard against the dam. She wasn't weighing honesty. She was deciding how much of it she could live with releasing. "They'll use both," she said. "The circle burns when it needs to erase. It whispers when it needs to own. And me." She lifted her chin, even as her eyes betrayed the tremor underneath. "I'm both. A traitor to erase. A symbol to own." Silas filed the words. They were jagged, but jagged words were usually true. He moved to his desk and picked up a cigarette, rolling it between his fingers before setting it back down untouched. "Then we start with Carter Vale." Lillian stiffened at the name. "You remember him?" "I remember everything," Silas said. "A scar doesn't hide in smoke. He'll have a place. Men like that don't vanish between jobs. They roost." "And if you find him," she asked. "Then I find the circle's throat," he said, quiet and sharp, as if the words themselves were a knife. The day unfolded with its own grim rhythm. Silas left her in the office with food from the corner diner and instructions to keep the bolt thrown. He moved like shadow through Blackwater, tracing Carter Vale's footprint in the city's grime. He spoke to a dockhand with nicotine-stained fingers who remembered a tall man paying cash for crates that never left the pier. He dropped questions in a card room where Vale's name fell like a stone into a pond. Ripples, but no surface break. He leaned against a lamppost outside a pharmacy and let a clerk's nervous slip tell him more than confession. Every fragment was a contour. Every contour drew closer to a map. By dusk, Silas had a location. A derelict theater on Rivington, boarded from the front, but alive with faint glows behind the wood. Not the circle's nest, but a perch for one of its crows. He returned for Lillian as the storm eased to drizzle. She hadn't touched the food, only sat with the revolver on the desk, staring at it like it was an old friend she both hated and needed. "You found him," she said when he entered. Not as question, but certainty. "Yes." "And you're going to walk into that place, and what?" "Convince him to talk." Silas gave a small shrug. "People always talk. The question is whether it's words or screams." The flicker of horror in her eyes wasn't for Vale. It was for him, for the way he said it without heat, as if pain were just another tool in his kit. "You think you're different from them," she whispered. "But sometimes you sound exactly like them." His jaw worked once. Then he opened the door. "Stay or follow. Your choice." She followed. Rivington Street by night was a dead artery. Old marquees loomed like tombstones, their bulbs long burned out, their glass teeth cracked. The theater Vale had chosen sagged in the rain, its posters faded to ghosts. The front doors were bolted, but Silas had no intention of entering there. He led Lillian down the side alley, past dumpsters sour with rot, until he found a stage door rusted but weak. Inside, darkness layered itself in tiers. Mildew and dust coated the air. Broken seats gaped at the stage like rotten mouths. Silas moved with care, his steps ghosting across carpet that had once been velvet red. Lillian's revolver gleamed faintly in her grip. They heard voices before they saw the light. Two men talking low near the stage. One was Carter Vale, unmistakable in his scar and deliberate stance. The other was younger, nervous, shifting weight like his shoes pinched. Silas crouched in the shadow of the wings. He watched Vale speak, measured, patient, a teacher instructing a disciple in fear. Words carried faintly. Loyalty, doctrine, blood. Lillian's breath hitched. Silas placed a hand lightly on her wrist. Not comfort, not command, but reminder. She steadied. Then Silas stepped forward. The boards creaked beneath his weight. Vale turned. Surprise barely registered before a pistol leveled. But Silas was faster. Not with his gun, but with his words. "Crimson rain," he said. The phrase cracked the air like a shot. Vale froze. The younger man looked confused. Lillian stiffened. "That's what you call it, isn't it?" Silas continued, stepping closer. Pale eyes locked on Vale's. The doctrine, the storm, crimson rain. For the first time, Scarjaw Carter Vale looked unsettled. His hand didn't lower, but the certainty behind it flickered. "Who told you that?" Vale demanded. Silas smiled, thin and sharp. "You did. Last night, when you came for her." The younger man shifted, uncertain now, his faith shaken by a phrase he wasn't supposed to hear from strangers. Vale saw it, saw the crack forming. His lips pulled back in a snarl. Silas didn't draw. He didn't need to. He stepped closer until the pistol's barrel almost brushed his chest. His voice stayed low and calm. "You're going to tell me everything, Carter, because bullets are cheap, but secrets are expensive. And right now, you can't afford to keep yours." Vale's eyes darted to Lillian, then back. Recognition flared, anger, betrayal. "She told you." He hissed. "She told me nothing," Silas said. "You just did." The room tightened like breath held too long. Vale's finger trembled near the trigger. The younger man shifted again, uncertainty thickening. Lillian raised her revolver, steady now, her aim a silent verdict. For a suspended moment, Blackwater itself seemed to wait, rain holding its breath against the boarded windows. And in that silence, Silas Kane stepped further into the crimson rain. The derelict theater stank of mildew and rot, but the air was cut with something sharper. Fear, sweat, the bitter tang of loyalty cracking. Carter Vale stood with his pistol leveled at Silas Kane's chest, jaw clenched around the scar that carved half his face into a permanent sneer. The younger recruit behind him shifted, uncertain, eyes darting between his mentor and the stranger who had just spoken their secret creed aloud. "Crimson rain," Silas said again, softer this time, as though tasting the words. "You wear like a badge, but it's nothing more than a leash." The pistol quivered just slightly in Vale's hand. He was a man who had killed before, who had carved his reputation from the bones of others. But Silas had struck something deeper than fear of death. He had spoken the circle's oath aloud, words not meant for outsiders. Words that bound. "You don't know what you're talking about," Vale growled. His voice was gravel over glass. Silas stepped closer. The move was reckless, but his eyes were steady, pale, and unflinching. "I know enough. Enough to see what it does to men like you. You bleed for them, break for them, and what do you get? A scar. A scar that tells the world you belong to someone else's hand." Behind him, Lillian Voss raised her revolver. The lamplight caught her face in sharp relief. The cheekbones, the hollows under her eyes, the fury rising to mask her fear. She had followed Kane into the lion's den because she had nowhere else left to run. The younger man, barely out of his teens, looked at her, then at Vale, and his uncertainty curdled. His lips parted, as if to ask a question, but no sound came. Silas turned his gaze on him. "How long have you worn the Circle's mask, kid? Long enough to know they'll carve you up the first time you hesitate? Long enough to realize oaths written in blood can't be erased?" The recruit blinked, mouth dry. His grip on the pistol slackened just slightly. Vale noticed, and rage twisted his features. "Don't listen to him." Vale snapped. "He's poison. He'll unmake you with words. You swore the oath. You belong to us now." "The blood oath," Silas murmured. His voice was quieter than Vale's, but sharper, sliding into the cracks like a blade. "You cut your palm, let it spill, and they make you drink the lie. You think it binds you to brotherhood, but all it binds you to is silence. Death if you break it, slavery if you keep it. The younger man's eyes widened. His hand trembled, and Silas saw it. The fracture. The truth had weight, and he had pressed it just hard enough that Vale's snarl deepened. He pressed the muzzle against Silas's chest. One more word and you're dead, Kane. Silas didn't blink. Then shoot. But the moment you do, the circle will know you cracked. Because I said their secret aloud, and you let me walk this far. They'll wonder what else I dragged out of you before the bullet. The silence that followed was knife-thin. Even the rain outside seemed to pause against the boards that Lillian's finger tightened on the trigger of her revolver. And the boy, his breath ragged, his mind unraveling, turned his gun not on Silas, but on Vale. "Is it true?" he demanded, voice shaking. "Tell me, is it true what he says about the oath?" Vale's eyes widened, just for an instant, and that instant was enough. Silas knew the answer without hearing it. The circle's secret bound men tighter than chains, but cracks had a way of spreading that he moved first. His hand snapped Vale's pistol aside, twisting the scarred man's wrist until bone ground against bone. The gun fired once into the rotten rafters, splinters raining down. Lillian's revolver barked a heartbeat later, shattering the stage light above and plunging the theater into half-darkness, chaos. Vale roared, wrenching free, driving his fist into Silas's ribs. Pain bloomed sharp, but Silas absorbed it, eyes cold, mind already cataloging Vale's stance, the weakness in his left knee, the way his scarred jaw clenched when he pivoted. Every detail was a thread, every thread a way to unravel him. The boy froze, gun wavering. He hadn't expected blood so fast, hadn't expected betrayal so close. His world was breaking, and Silas knew it. "Choose," Silas spat, shoving Vale back with raw force. His voice cracked through the dark like lightning. "Him, or the truth. The oath, or your life." Vale lunged, scar twisted into fury, but the boy's hand moved faster. The pistol thundered, Vale staggered. His eyes went wide, then glassy. The scarred jaw that had once terrified a dozen men slackened, and Carter Vale collapsed onto the rotting boards, blood spreading like paint into the wood. The boy stood trembling, pistol still smoking, horror dawning at what he'd done. Silas Kane straightened, chest heaving once, then steadying. He looked at the corpse, then at the boy. "The oath was never yours," he said. "It was theirs. Now you're free, if you can live with the cost." The boy shook, tears mixing with sweat. He dropped the pistol. It clattered across the boards, echoing through the dead theater. Lillian lowered her revolver, breath ragged, eyes locked on the scarred body. "It's never that easy," she whispered. Silas nodded once. His gaze never left the boy. "No, it isn't." The storm outside rose again, as if Blackwater itself exhaled. But inside the theater, the blood oath had just been broken. The storm outside clawed harder at the broken theater, rain driving through shattered panes and dripping into the darkness like the slow ticking of a clock. Carter Vale's corpse sprawled across the boards, his scarred jaw slack, eyes wide in the expression of a man who had realized too late that the circle had demanded more from him than he could give. Silas Kane stood over him, chest rising with the steady rhythm of control reclaimed. He wasn't untouched. Vale's punch had bruised ribs, and the ache would deepen by morning, but he had weathered worse storms. He always did. The boy stood frozen, hand still trembling even though the pistol now lay at his feet. His breath came in shallow gasps. The weight of what he had done was settling over him like a shroud. One bullet had freed him from master, but it had also shackled him to a lifetime of memory. Lillian Voss holstered her revolver with deliberate slowness. Her gaze lingered on the dead man, but her mind was elsewhere, calculating, connecting threads the way Silas had taught her. She broke the silence first. "He knew something," she said, voice hushed but sharp. Vale wasn't just another blade for the circle. He carried knowledge. The oath wasn't his burden alone. It was a chain tied to others. Silas's eyes narrowed. He crouched beside the body, gloved fingers brushing the lapel of Vale's rain-soaked coat. His hand moved with precision, searching, not the pockets a common thief would choose, but the hidden seams where men of violence tucked the things they couldn't afford to lose. He found it beneath the lining. A strip of parchment, small, folded, sealed with a crude smear of red wax. He lifted it into the dim light. The boy gasped. It's part of the rite. Every initiate, his voice cracked. Every initiate carries one. Silas studied the seal. The wax wasn't ordinary. It shimmered faintly even in the low light, as though flecked with iron. A mixture, ritualistic, a signature of belonging. That he unfolded the parchment. On it was a single mark, a circle enclosing a downward slash. Below it, scrawled in sharp strokes, a phrase, bloodbinds. Silent seals. Lillian exhaled slowly. A creed. Silas shook his head. A contract. Words matter less than the symbol. This is the tether. The moment they cut their palms, they're given this scrap. Proof they bled. Proof they belong. Destroy it, and the circle calls you a traitor. Keep it, and you're bound forever. The boy swallowed hard, his voice breaking. I burned mina. They told me if I lost it, they'd carve a new one into my skin. Silas's pale eyes rose to him, cutting through the haze of fear. And they would have, because it's never about belief. It's about evidence. Evidence that you can be broken and remade. He folded the parchment again, sliding it into his own coat. His mind was already running ahead, through corridors of logic and history, pulling threads that Vale's death wasn't an ending. It was an opening. Someone higher in the circle had trusted him to guard the oath. That meant Vale was a link in the chain. Not the first, not the last, but crucial. And a chain was only as strong as its weakest link. Silas straightened, his expression unreadable. He wasn't the head, not even close, but killing him will draw attention. The circle will know their oath has been broken tonight. They'll come sniffing for answers. Lillian frowned, and when they find out you spoke their creed aloud, they'll come for me, Silas finished. His tone was flat, almost weary. He didn't fear the inevitability. He acknowledged it like a man noting the rain outside. And that's how we'll find them. The boy stumbled forward suddenly, desperation spilling from him. No, you don't understand. You can't fight them. You think you've seen what they are, but Vale was just a shadow. The circle doesn't forgive. They don't forget. Once blood is spilled, the oath calls to the others. They'll know I fired the shot. His voice cracked, pleading. They'll kill me. Silas studied him with a detached calm. The boy's terror wasn't surprising. It was inevitable. But in fear there was truth, and Silas sifted through it like ash for sparks. You want to live? He asked. The boy nodded violently. Then start talking. Tell me what Vale wouldn't. The boy's breath hitched. His eyes darted to the corpse, then to Silas. He hesitated, and in hesitation, Silas saw the invisible collar still around his throat. The oath forbids. Silas's voice cut him off like steel. The oath is broken. You broke it with that shot. The only question left is whether you waste your breath on silence, or use it to claw your way out before the circle drags you under. The boy trembled, lips moving soundlessly, then words finally spilled. There's a house. On the east docks. Not a house. Really, an old warehouse painted white. They call it the chapel. It's where initiates are brought after the blood rite. Vale. Vale brought me there. Lillian's brows knit. The chapel. The word sounded wrong in her mouth, twisted by irony. The boy continued, voice fragile. There are more like me there. Recruits. They make us swear, then they scatter us into the city. Errands, collections, favors, tiny things that build into something bigger. Vale was their shepherd. Without him, his voice broke. They'll send another. Silas absorbed every word, filing it into the latticework of deduction. A chapel, a warehouse painted white, a ritual that bound recruits through fear and tokens. Vale was a shepherd, which meant others served the same role. The circle wasn't a monolith. It was a hive. He turned toward the shattered doorway. Rain hissed through, drenching the night outside in a crimson sheen under the street lamps. The chapel, Silas repeated, almost to himself. That's where we go next. Lillian moved beside him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his coat. And if it's a trap? Silas's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it hadn't been so cold. Then we'll see what they pray to when the blood runs the other way. Behind them, the boy sagged to his knees, trembling in the shadow of the corpse he had made. His hands covered his face, muffling sobs that were half grief, half release. Silas spared him no more words. The boy had chosen once tonight, and that choice would echo louder than any counsel. The circle would come for him regardless. Whether he ran or stayed, he was already marked. Silas Kane stepped into the storm, Lillian at his side. The city swallowed them, its veins awash with crimson rain. And in his pocket, the folded parchment pulsed with silent weight. The blood oath, unbroken yet undone. The east docks reeked of rot and rust. Salt hung in the air like a film over the lungs, and every creak of the pilings echoed with the groan of a city that had long ago stopped caring who it swallowed. Silas Kane and Lillian Voss moved through the fog without haste, their figures blurred into silhouettes against the sodium glow of distant lamps. The chapel stood at the water's edge, a warehouse once painted white, but now streaked with grime, its walls scarred by time and storms. The name was cruel irony. There was no sanctity in its lines, only the hard geometry of a tomb. Silas stopped at the fringe of the dockyard's light, his gaze sweeping the structure. His eyes narrowed, cataloging details others would overlook. The faint gleam of glass in a second-story window, the unnatural stillness of the water near the pilings, the pattern of footprints in the damp earth leading toward the heavy doors. Guards, he murmured, but not visible. That's their trick. They make the approach feel easy, lure you into thinking the oath is just a whisper in the dark, when really it's a net of blades. Lillian's hand brushed the revolver at her side. You think they know Vale is dead? Silas's pale eyes flickered toward her. They always know. He crouched, lifting a small shard of glass from the ground, holding it to the dim glow. The surface was smeared faintly with a powdery residue. He rubbed it between his fingers, brought it to his nose. The bitter tang of iron and ash. Burn offerings, he said softly. They burn the scraps once the initiates are marked. Ash scattered at the docks, washed into the sea. Cleansing by tide. It means there was a rite here recently. Lillian's jaw tightened. How recent? Silas let the shard fall, his mind running through the chain of cause and effect. The rain had come hard tonight, washing the docks clean. Yet the residue clung stubbornly. Within 24 hours, a sound cut the night, then a low moan, almost human, carried by the wind from within the warehouse. It wasn't the groan of timber. It was the sound of someone gagged, bound, suffering. Lillian's eyes flicked to Silas. Prisoners, or recruits waiting to be broken. His tone was colder than the rain. They moved closer, hugging the shadow of the dockside cranes. Silas's hand hovered near his coat pocket where the blood oath parchment lay folded. The weight of it pressed into him like a second heartbeat. The door. Silas pressed his palm to the wood, feeling vibrations. His ear leaned close. Footsteps. 2, maybe 3, pacing within. The rhythm was disciplined, almost ritualistic. He straightened. No bullets unless necessary, he murmured. The circle thrives on fear. Better they die without a sound. He slipped a thin blade from his sleeve, steel honed to silence. Lillian drew her revolver, but kept it low, her eyes hard. Silas eased the door open. The hinges should have screamed, but someone had oiled them recently. Another detail, another reminder. The circle prepared. Inside, the air was thick with candle smoke and rust. The warehouse was gutted, its rafters hung with chains, hooks swaying in the draft. In the center stood a crude altar, a slab of concrete stained dark with old blood. Around it, Crates formed a crooked semicircle, and on them burned thick red candles. Two men stood guard. Their heads turned at the faintest shift of air, but Silas was already upon the first, blades sliding into the space beneath his ear, a sharp intake of breath, and then silence. The body crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. The second reached for his pistol, but Lillian's shot cracked once, a muffled bark that echoed against the stone. He dropped, blood pooling quick and dark. The moaning grew clearer now. Silas turned. At the far side of the warehouse, bound to a chair, a figure writhed, gagged, head lolling. The boy had spoken true. There were recruits here, victims waiting to be carved into belonging. Silas approached, his eyes narrowing. The captive was young, barely older than the boy who had killed Vale. His wrists were raw from rope, his chest heaving in shallow panic. Silas tugged the gag free. The boy gasped, words tumbling out. "Please, I haven't sworn yet. Please don't let them." Silas's hand pressed gently to his shoulder, steadying him. His voice was calm, almost clinical. "You've no oath binding you yet. That makes you dangerous to them, because you can still speak." Behind him, Lillian scanned the shadows. If there's one, there are more. This place isn't just a chapel. It's a factory. Silas's pale eyes swept the space again, his mind weaving the fragments into a picture. Vale's parchment, the boy's confession, the ash at the docks, the altar before him. It was all part of the same machinery. Fear, ritual, silence. But a machine could be dismantled. If you knew where to cut, he pulled the folded oath parchment from his coat, holding it up to the candlelight. The captive boy's eyes widened at the sight. "That's Vale's," Silas said softly. "A shepherd's token. Proof of his bond. Proof of his leash. Without it, his link is broken." He let the flame catch the corner. The parchment curled, blackened, the wax seal bubbling as it crumbled into ash. The captive flinched, as though expecting thunder. Nothing came. Silas's gaze lingered on the burning scrap, voice low and sharp. "Symbols are only as strong as the fear that sustains them. The circle binds with blood and silence. Break either, and their creed unravels." The boy trembled, hope flickering like the candle's flame. "Then it can be broken?" Silas's lips pressed into a line. "Everything can." But even as he said it, the echo of footsteps rose outside. Dozens, not two or three. The circle had known. The trap had been waiting all along. Lillian's revolver snapped upward, her eyes narrowing. "They're here." Silas slid his blade back into his sleeve, his expression unreadable. "Then the oath is tested tonight." The heavy doors shuddered as fists pounded against them. Voices chanted from beyond, low and unified. Bloodbinds. Silence seals. The captive whimpered, shrinking into his chair. Lillian's knuckles whitened on her revolver, and Silas Kane, calm in the storm, stepped forward to face the doors, pale eyes catching the candlelight like steel catching fire. "The circle," he whispered. "Let's see how loud your silence screams." The doors crashed inward. The storm spilled in, and crimson rain followed. The blaze consumed the old chapel in a frenzy of sparks and smoke, its roof collapsing like a lung caving in. Flames bled against the rain, hissing and spitting where the storm tried to choke them down. Silas Kane didn't flinch at the roar behind him. He never looked back at buildings once they started to fall. The dead deserved their silence. What mattered were the living, and the trail they left behind. Lillian stumbled as they cut through a crooked alley, pulling the rescued boy by the arm. The child's clothes were stiff with soot and the stink of burnt wood, his eyes wide with the kind of horror that didn't fade with time. Silas slowed his pace, forcing them into the shadow of a crumbling wall, and pressed a hand up for quiet. The only sounds were the rain striking tin gutters, and somewhere distant, a siren moaning uselessly through Blackwater's fog. He crouched, pale eyes sweeping the ground. The cobblestones shimmered dark beneath the street lamps. Not just water. He touched it with 2 fingers and lifted them to his nose. Blood, still warm. A fresh trail, thin at first, then pooling where a man had staggered, maybe been dragged. They herded someone this way, Silas muttered. His voice was low, a rasp like gravel. Not one of their soldiers, the strides uneven. See, he pointed to faint scrapes where a boot had dragged. Heavier on the left side, alive when they passed. Lillian squinted, then looked at him. You can read that from water and shadows? Silas didn't answer. She knew better than to expect one. The boy swallowed hard, clutching his soot-blackened shirt. That they take the chosen deeper. Past the docks, to the House of Silence. The words seemed to hang there, heavier than the storm itself. Silas straightened slowly, the brim of his hat dripping rain. His gaze locked on the boy, pale and sharp as broken glass. House of Silence. The child nodded quickly, as if the shadows themselves might strike him if he hesitated. It's where the circle's true ones go. Not the chapel, not the docks. Those are masks. The house is real. That's where they were the others. Silas's jaw tightened. The circle always left shells behind. Layers of deception to break the careless, like glass mazes in an amusement hall. The chapel was already ash, but the house, that was something else. A name wrapped in dread, whispered by the weak, enforced by the unseen. Lillian checked the revolver she'd taken off veil, spinning the chamber with steady fingers. Her voice was cold, but Silas caught the tremor she tried to bury. Then that's where we're headed. The detective's eyes lingered on the trail, bleeding into the gutter, crimson flowing into the drains like veins feeding the city's black heart. He whispered, almost to himself, the rain doesn't wash it away. It carries it deeper. They moved again, weaving through the bones of Blackwater. The city closed around them like a trap sprung long ago, alleys narrowing into blind walls, windows boarded but alive with whispers, the stink of coal smoke crawling in through every breath. A neon sign flickered above a liquor den, sputtering red, and for an instant Silas saw it not as light but as blood dripping from the sky. Crimson rained as they walked. His mind built the scene piece by piece. The scuff marks told him the captive was middle-aged, weight unbalanced on the left, perhaps an injury, or bound at one side. The smear of blood along the wall suggested resistance. He'd been shoved hard, but not strong enough to fight back. The circle didn't waste their strength, which meant this prisoner mattered. Whoever he is, Silas said finally, his voice flat, he's worth more alive than dead. Otherwise, they'd have left him in the fire. Lillian gave a humorless smile. That narrows it down to half the city's worth of pawns. Silas didn't smile back. He almost never did. His eyes stayed on the boy, who avoided his stare. How do you know this house? The boy hesitated, lips trembling, then whispered, because I was meant to go there. Vale said I wasn't ready, that I'd start with the chapel first. A gust of wind pushed rain down the alley. Silas stood silent for a long moment. The circle didn't nurture children out of kindness. If they groomed this boy, it was for something darker, an oath, a mask, a silence that suffocated the soul. He turned his collar up against the storm and led them forward. The trail of blood glistened ahead like a rope into the void. The storm deepened as they pushed north into Blackwater's marrow. Neon lights sputtered against the rain, bending in distorted halos across puddles that swallowed the sidewalks. The streets were emptier now, but not silent. The city never was. From behind rusted shutters came the muffled rhythm of gramophones. Drunken laughter sliced off mid-note. A woman's cry twisted into a hush. Blackwater had a way of choking its own noise, as if the very bricks conspired to keep secrets. Silas walked a pace ahead, his coat dragging shadows. Every few steps, he dropped his gaze to the stones, reading them as a priest would scripture. The trail of blood was thinner now, diluted by rain, but still there. He traced the arc of droplets where the captive had stumbled, leaned on the wall, then been yanked forward again. He muttered calculations under his breath. The stride length, the time elapsed, the weight distribution. He's fading, Silas said finally. His voice cut through the storm like a knife through cloth. Lillian pulled the boy closer. Then we'd better move faster. No, Silas raised a hand, eyes narrowing. Rushing means missing. The circle thrives on what's missed. They halted at a crooked intersection where 4 alleys bled into one another like veins into a heart. The ground, there was a mosaic of signs. A dropped cufflink, bent from being stepped on. A cigarette still smoldering despite the rain. The smear of a palm against a brick face. Silas crouched, his pale eyes darting from one to the next, building the scene in his mind. 2 escorts, he said softly. One tall, one shorter. The tall one smokes with his left hand. See the ash angle, the burn mark? The other drags with his right. They're not in rhythm. Hired muscle, not initiates. Whoever they're delivering, they don't trust each other. Lillian tilted her head. You read all that from ashes and brick? Silas didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was confirmation enough. The boy tugged Lillian's sleeve, whispering urgently. The house isn't far. I can feel it. Silas turned to him, and for a heartbeat the boy faltered beneath that stare. The kind of stare that dissected you, that left nowhere to hide. Silas spoke slowly, as if weighing every word. What does it look like? The boy shook his head. You don't find it by sight. You hear it first. A silence so loud it hurts. Then the masks come. Rain lashed the alley, but the words lingered, chilling more than the wind. They moved again, deeper into the skeleton of the city. Buildings loomed higher, facades eroded into grotesque faces by decades of soot and storm. Windows were blind, doors bolted with rust, but somewhere behind those walls, Silas felt the weight of unseen eyes. Blackwater wasn't asleep. It was watching as they neared the river. The trail of blood grew sharper again. Silas crouched once more, fingers brushing the edge of a darkened smear across cobblestone. They turned here. He pointed to a narrow stairwell descending between warehouses, half drowned in shadow. Not toward the river. Down. The stairwell yawned like a throat into the undercity. No light reached its bottom. Just darkness and the hiss of rain slipping down metal rails. Lillian's hand tightened on the revolver. This looks like a trap. It is. Silas rose, adjusting his hat. That doesn't change where it leads. The boy trembled, but said nothing. They descended, step by step, the city's pulse dimming with each tread. The air grew heavier, colder, as if the stone itself resented their intrusion. At the base of the stairwell stretched a tunnel, its bricks slick with moss and rainwater. The echoes of their footsteps seemed swallowed rather than carried. Silas stopped suddenly. His head tilted, listening. Nothing. No drip of water, no rats scurrying, no distant hum of machines. Absolute quiet, so total it pressed against the ears like pressure under deep water. The silence, the boy whispered, clutching Lillian's coat. We've reached it. Silas's gaze hardened. The house wasn't a place above ground. It was buried, hidden where the city's voice could not reach. He stepped forward, the silence closing around him like a mask pulled tight. Then he saw them. Masks. Dozens of them, nailed to the tunnel walls, staring with hollow eyes. Each different, carved wood, porcelain, metal beaten thin as skin. Some were expressionless, others twisted into grotesque parodies of laughter or grief. Rainwater ran down them like tears. Lillian exhaled sharply. God, but Silas didn't flinch. His gaze roamed from mask to mask, reading the language beneath the horror. Placement, angle, where? Not decoration, he murmured. Instruction, each mask a role, each silence a vow. The tunnel bent sharply, and ahead a door waited. Iron, slick with condensation, no handle, only a slit across its face. Beyond it, faint and muffled, came the rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't theirs. Silas stepped closer, whispering as if to himself. The circle doesn't build doors to keep people out. They build them to see who dares to knock. The iron door loomed like a sealed coffin, its surface wet with condensation, breathing the cold of the undercity into the narrow tunnel. Silas stood before it, rain dripping from the brim of his hat onto the stone floor. He didn't move for several seconds. His pale eyes traced the lines of rust that ran like veins down the metal. A puzzle. Always a puzzle. That he pressed his ear against the door. Silence. Not the muffled quiet of thick walls, but a silence so deliberate it was almost a sound of its own, an engineered absence. The circle had built this place with intent, stripping it of every note of life. No echoes, no whispers, no resonance. Just nothing. A void that swallowed identity. Lillian shifted uneasily, her revolver trembling just slightly in her hand. It feels wrong, like the city doesn't exist past this point. Silas whispered, "That's the point. You leave Blackwater behind when you step inside. You become the mask." The boy huddled against the wall, eyes darting from mask to mask nailed around them. He shook his head violently. "You can't go in. They'll take your name, your face. They'll make you silent." Silas crouched, his face level with the boy's. His stare cut through the panic with surgical precision. What they take only has value if you give it. The circle thrives on fear, but fear leaves tracks, and I know how to follow them. For a moment the boy stopped trembling, caught in the stillness of Silas's voice. Then he nodded once, though he clearly didn't believe it. Silas rose again, studying the slit in the door, an eye hole wide enough for a face to appear, narrow enough for a voice to judge. He knew the circle. They didn't need locks. They needed recognition. Whoever stood behind that slit was gatekeeper and executioner in one. Without warning, Silas rapped his knuckles against the iron. 3 short taps, spaced like a heartbeat. Lillian's eyes widened. "You're insane." The slit slid open with a metallic hiss. Darkness peered back. A voice came through low, almost inhuman, distorted by the resonance of the chamber beyond. "Mask?" The single word clawed at the air like a blade. Silas's voice was steady. "Forgotten." A pause stretched, long enough for Lillian's grip to tighten on her revolver, for the boy to squeeze his eyes shut. Then the voice answered, "Enter." The iron door groaned open, stone grinding against stone. A draft of cold air washed over them, colder than the storm outside, carrying with it the faintest trace of incense and rot. The 3 stepped inside. The chamber beyond was cavernous, lit only by candles burning in iron cages suspended from the ceiling. Their lights swung slowly, shadows swaying like pendulums across walls painted with crimson streaks. Not paint, blood, layered and dried, carved over with symbols too old for language. Dozens of figures stood around the perimeter. Each wore a mask, porcelain, wood, bone, faces without identity. Their robes were dark, blending into the shadows, but the glint of eyes behind those masks shone like embers. The silence was unbearable. Even their breathing was muted, shallow, synchronized as if one. The center of the chamber lay a stone table. Upon it the captive, a man bound at wrists and ankles, his shirt torn, chest rising in shallow gasps. Blood leaked from his side, staining the altar beneath him. His head turned just enough for Silas to catch a glimpse of his face. Recognition flickered there. The man knew Silas, or feared him. Lillian whispered, almost inaudible, "Who is he?" Silas didn't answer. Not yet. His gaze swept the chamber, every detail feeding the silent machinery of his mind. The altar's grooves channeled blood toward a drain. The masks aligned not randomly, but in patterns of hierarchy, angles of respect, dominance, subservience. The silence wasn't mere ritual. It was weaponized, a condition to erase will. The boy pressed closer to Lillian, whispering with trembling lips. "This is the oath. They'll bleed him until he can't scream. Then they'll put on the mask. And when he wakes, he won't be him anymore." One of the masked figures stepped forward, taller than the rest. mask of hammered steel that gleamed against the candlelight. The leader. His voice was a whisper of iron scraping stone. You are not chosen. Yet you enter. Silas stepped forward, his shadow long against the altar. His coat dripped rainwater onto the stones, each drop loud against the manufactured silence. He tipped his hat back slightly, enough for the pale glint of his eyes to show. I don't need to be chosen, Silas said, his voice low but firm. I'm here to listen. A ripple passed through the massed congregation. Not sound, but movement, shoulders stiffening, heads tilting in unison. The leader tilted his head, steel mask reflecting the candlelight. Then listen well. Tonight, a name dies. A silence is born. And when the crimson rain falls, the city will kneel. Silas's gaze shifted back to the bound man, his mind racing. He caught details. The ring half hidden beneath the captive's torn sleeve. The bruising pattern that matched the grip of Vale's men. The way his lips shaped a word silently. Help. The truth clicked into place. The captive wasn't just a pawn. He was a key, and the circle was about to turn him into a weapon. Silas took another step forward, voice calm, precise, every word sharp enough to cut glass. A silence that must be enforced isn't silence. It's fear. And fear, he said, eyes locked on the steel mask, bleeds louder than any scream. The circle stirred. The storm inside the house was about to break. The House of Silence stood like a mausoleum at the far end of Blackwater's oldest quarter, a carcass of stone and shadow. Its facade was cracked, its stained glass blinded by soot and rain, but within a pulse throbbed, ancient, cold, and fanatical. Tonight, the circle had gathered for their crimson rite, and every corner of the city seemed to lean toward this place, as though it knew its fate would be decided within those walls. Silas Kane walked toward the building with his collar turned high against the storm. His coat was drenched, clinging to him like a second skin. The rain fell heavier now, crimson in the street lamps, thick as if the heavens themselves bled. At his side, Lillian kept pace, her revolver hidden beneath her shawl, her eyes sharp with resolve. Behind them, the boy moved quietly, barefoot in the downpour, eyes wide but unafraid. The closer they drew, the more the night pressed in. No sound of the city carried here. No carriages, no drunks, no distant music. Only the steady drum of rain and the faint hum of voices from within the temple. A chorus low and resonant, vibrating in the bones. Silas paused at the threshold. His eyes traced the carvings above the door. Figures without faces, mouths sealed, their hands raised in benediction. He felt the weight of their silence pressing down on him, demanding submission. Lillian touched his arm. Are we ready for this? He did not answer her directly. His gaze swept over the details, the flickering candlelight through the cracks, the slight distortion in the chanting rhythm, the way the door hinges were freshly oiled. They expect someone, he murmured. They've prepared. Then they know we're coming. Or they want us to. His voice was flat, the kind of voice that left no space for comfort. The boy's eyes flicked to the door, then to Silas. If we don't go in, he said softly, others will die. For the briefest moment, something passed over Silas's face. Regret, perhaps, or recognition. He saw himself mirrored in the boy. The shadow of what he once was before the blood and the rain. He placed a hand on the child's shoulder, not gently, but firmly. Stay close. Watch everything, and remember what you see. With that, he pushed the heavy doors open. The sound hit them first, the chant of dozens of voices rising and falling in unison, a tide of devotion. The chamber beyond stretched vast, its vaulted ceiling swallowed in shadow. Torches and candles lined the walls, spilling light over masked acolytes who stood in concentric circles around a stone altar at the center. Upon that altar lay the magistrate, bound in crimson cloth, his face pale, his chest rising in shallow, frantic breaths, and before him stood the figure in the steel mask. The leader of the circle was draped in robes darker than the surrounding cultists, his mask gleaming like a polished skull. His presence commanded the room like gravity itself. When he raised his hand, the chanting ceased at once, and silence fell thick and oppressive. Silas, Lillian, and the boys stepped into that silence. Dozens of heads turned toward them, eyes hidden behind masks, knives glinting in the firelight. The tension was a living thing, coiled and waiting. The steel mask spoke, voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics, deep, metallic, deliberate. Silas Kane, the man of reason, the hunter of shadows. You walk willingly into the sanctum you sought to expose. Silas's eyes narrowed, his mind dissecting every syllable, every tremor. The voice was disguised, distorted by the mask, but beneath it he caught traces, an accent carefully suppressed, a cadence that spoke of old money and education. He stored away like a clue on a chessboard. "I came," Silas said, his voice low but carrying, "to end the silence you built on blood." The circle shifted uneasily, knives twitching in hands. But the steel mask only tilted his head, as though considering a specimen. "And it? No. You came because you cannot resist it. You, too, are a servant of silence, Kane. It haunts you, fills the cracks between your thoughts. Do you think I do not know your past?" Lillian stiffened. The boy glanced up at Silas. The leader's voice sharpened, cutting through the chamber like a scalpel. "Shall I tell them what silence cost you? The woman who screamed in the alley while you calculated the angle of the blade? The blood you failed to stop? You preached truth, but truth is what murdered her." A murmur rippled through the zealots. The chant of silence was broken by doubt, by curiosity. Silas stood motionless, but inside his chest the memory bloomed. The rain-slicked cobblestones, her face pale beneath the gaslight, his hands pressed against the wound that would not close. His failure, his silence, that he forced it back, locked it behind the steel of his will. His eyes met the leader's mask, cold and unflinching. "You hide behind secrets and shadows. I carry mine in the open. The difference between us is this: I can bleed." The words struck the circle like a blow. Some of the zealots shifted, uncertain. Others tightened their grip on their knives, desperate to cling to their faith. The leader spread his arms. "Then bleed, detective. Bleed for them all." At his command, the circle erupted. Knives flashed, feet pounded stone, and the chamber filled with a roar of zealots closing in. Lillian fired her revolver, the shots cracking like lightning, dropping the first two who charged. Silas moved with lethal precision, sidestepping a blade, twisting an arm until bone snapped, disarming another and turning his own knife against him. The boy darted between shadows, unseen, his eyes drinking in every move. But Silas knew this was only the beginning. The leader had not moved. He waited, patient as the storm, as though every death that filled the floor was a necessary verse in a scripture. Silas's mind raced, not just through the fight, but through the patterns of the circle, the fractures in their faith, the tells in the leader's stance. He was assembling the truth piece by bloody piece. And when the revelation came, he would strike not with blade or bullet, but with the one weapon the circle feared most, the truth. The chamber dissolved into chaos. The circle surged forward, their knives like teeth bared in the flickering firelight. The chanting was gone now, replaced by the brutal percussion of steel on stone, gunfire, and human cries. Silas moved through them with the precision of a man who saw more than others could. Angles, trajectories, weaknesses. Every detail became a calculation. The slight imbalance in a zealot's left step, the way another raised his arm a fraction too high, the flicker of hesitation in the eye of one barely committed to the cause. He exploited each flaw with ruthless efficiency that a blade grazed his coat. He pivoted, grabbed the wrist, twisted until the cultist screamed, then buried the knife back into its wielder's gut. Another came at him from behind. Silas ducked low, sweeping the man's legs, sending him crashing headlong into a torch stand that fell with a shower of sparks. Lillian fought beside him like a shadow of fire. Her revolver barked in short, precise bursts, never wasted, each shot finding a throat, an eye, a chest. When a cylinder clicked empty, she drove the butt of the weapon into the jaw of a zealot and stole his blade without hesitation. Her face was hard as marble, but her breath came ragged, every movement a dance with exhaustion. The boy did not fight. He slipped through the bodies like smoke, staying low, hiding in blind spots Silas had taught him to notice. His eyes never left Silas, watching, absorbing, learning, and still the leader in the steel mask did not move. He remained at the altar, his hands folded in his sleeves, watching the violence as a priest might watch a sermon unfold. His silence was more commanding than any shout. Silas saw the way the zealots glanced toward their master, even in the midst of fury, seeking permission, seeking approval. The circle's strength was not in their blades. It was in their faith. Faith bound to a man of steel and shadows. Break that, Silas thought, and the circle would collapse. He feigned to stumble, allowing a blade to slash across his arm. Pain seared him, warm blood soaking his sleeve, but he gritted his teeth and let it fuel his voice. He turned, eyes burning, and shouted so that all could hear. You follow a ghost in a mask, a man too afraid to show his face. Is this your truth? Is this your silence? The words cracked like thunder. For a heartbeat, some faltered. Knives hesitated. The firelight revealed the trembling of hands. The steel mask finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped down from the altar. His robes whispered against the stone floor. The zealots parted to let him pass, their faith drawing them back in a line. Words, the leader said, his voice reverberating from the chamber walls. Always words. You believe them weapons, Kane. But words are wind. Steel is truth. Silas's lip curled. He could hear the effort beneath the distorted voice, the way each syllable was pressed with care, as though hiding something beneath the performance. He tracked the details, the slight stiffness in the gait, the faint limp masked by the robes, the habit of favoring the left side that he was close. He could feel it. The leader raised a hand, and the zealots froze where they stood. Blood dripped from their knives, steam rising from bodies cooling on the stone, but stillness returned like a tide obeying the moon. You claim to hunt silence, the leader said, stepping closer. Yet silence hunts you. It has followed you since the alley, since the woman who died beneath your hands. You are guilt like armor, Kane. Tell me, do they know? The zealots murmured, eyes turning to Silas. Silas straightened. His breath came heavy, but his gaze was clear, sharp, dissecting. He did not flinch at the memory. He let it burn, a scar he no longer denied. Yes, he said, his voice cut clean through the chamber. I failed her. I failed others. I carry their silence with me. But failure is not faith, and guilt is not devotion. The zealots stirred again. The crack widened. Doubt slipped in like water through fractured stone. The leader tilted his head as though weighing the shift. Then he gestured toward the altar, toward the bound magistrate whose eyes rolled in terror. This man, corrupt, decadent, a parasite feeding on your city. His silence will purify what yours cannot. Watch, Kane. Learn. He drew a blade from within his robes. It gleamed crimson in the firelight, serrated, ceremonial. He pressed it against the magistrate's throat. Stop. Lillian shouted, her voice raw. She aimed her revolver, though she knew the distance was too great. Silas raised a hand, stopping her. His eyes never left the steel mask. His mind raced, stripping away the theater, the symbols, the lies. The limp, the cadence, the suppressed accent, the way he spoke of corruption with such familiarity, of justice twisted into ritual. And then it struck him. The revelation cut through the haze like lightning. He knew who stood behind the mask. His voice carried, clear and merciless. You speak of parasites, of corruption, because you are the magistrate's shadow, his own blood, his brother. The chamber gasped. The zealots froze. Even Lillian's eyes widened. The steel mask lowered the blade a fraction, only a fraction, but Silas saw it. The tremor, the fracture. The truth had struck. Your power, Silas said, pressing forward, voice rising with each word, comes not from silence, but from secrets. You fed their faith with lies. Cloak yourself in mystery. But the limp you cannot hide, the tongue you cannot erase. You are Aldrich Vey, the brother who vanished, the lawyer who preached justice while feasting on bribes. You turned your shame into this cult, your mask into their god. The leader stood motionless, the mask reflecting firelight. Silence stretched, taut as a wire ready to snap. Then the steel mask tilted, and beneath its distortion, the voice cracked with rage. You think truth saves you, Kane? No, truth damns you. And tonight it damns this city. He raised the blade again, pressing it against the magistrate's skin until blood welled in a thin red line. The zealots erupted, torn between doubt and devotion. Some cried out in worship, others in fear. The chamber shook with their divided voices, and Silas knew. The circle was breaking, but breaking did not mean beaten. Not yet. The chamber had become a storm of contradictions, zealots divided, faith unraveling, fear gnawing at devotion. Some screamed Aldrich's name in disbelief. Others pressed their foreheads to the floor, clinging desperately to the myth of the masked Messiah. Silas stood in the center of it, breathing hard, blood dripping from his wounded arm. He felt the pulse of the city itself thrumming in this subterranean heart. The rot, the lies, the blind worship of power. And before him, the architect of it all, Aldrich Vey, once a man of law, now a phantom in steel. Look at them, Silas said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the cacophony. They believed you a savior. All you gave them was another tyrant hiding behind a mask. Just like every parasite you condemned. Aldrich's breath rattled through the mask, jagged with fury. They needed belief. You strip it from them, Kane, and what's left? Ashes. Do you call that justice? I call it truth. Silas stepped forward. Truth doesn't need masks. Aldrich's blade twitched at the magistrate's throat. The man whimpered, his eyes rolling white. You claim me a liar, Aldrich hissed, but I'm the cure to this city's disease. My silence is mercy. My judgment, purity. They would drown in corruption without me. Silas studied him. The limp was clearer now under strain. The tremor in his hand was not just rage, but weakness. He was fraying, the mask cracking. You drowned in it long before they did, Silas replied coldly. For a moment, the chamber froze in a tableau of firelight and shadows, zealots poised, Lillian aiming her pistol, the boy clutching the stone steps, Silas advancing, Aldrich's knife at a trembling throat. Then the storm broke that a zealot, torn between doubt and devotion, screamed and lunged at Silas. Silas twisted aside, the blade nicking his coat, and shoved the man into another. The crowd ignited, some charging in blind loyalty, others retreating in terror. The chamber erupted again into chaos. Lillian fired, the report deafening in the cavern, dropping a zealot who rushed her flank. She shouted at Silas over the roar. End it. Now. Silas's eyes locked with Aldrich's. In that instant, every calculation aligned. The distance, the limp, the blood-slick stones, the frailty behind the mask that he moved. Aldrich slashed, the blade grazing Silas's side, but Silas caught his wrist, twisted with brutal precision, and drove his shoulder into the man's chest. They crashed against the altar. The magistrate screamed as blood dripped from the nick at his throat. The mask loomed inches from Silas's face. He could smell iron, sweat, decay. With his free hand, Silas clawed at the mask straps. Aldrich roared, thrashing, but Silas's grip was relentless. He tore the steel away, and the chamber gasped. The face beneath was pale, sunken, scarred by years of obsession. Aldrich Vey's eyes burned with a fanatic's fire, but his flesh was weak, his body wasted. He was no god, no savior, just a man hollowed by his own lies. The zealots faltered, their faith shattering in the sight of him. Silas raised his voice, letting it ring like a verdict. This is your prophet, a man who fed you silence to mask his shame, a coward who made himself a god because he could not bear the truth. The circle fractured. Some dropped their knives and fled into the tunnels. Others collapsed in prayer, sobbing. A few still howled in rage, but their numbers were broken. Aldrich snarled, spittle flecking his lips. He drove his knee into Silas's stomach, tearing free, and staggered back, maskless now exposed. His eyes flicked around the chamber, searching desperately for devotion that was crumbling before him. "No," he screamed. "Do not listen. He lies. I am your silence. I am your judgment." But no chorus rose to answer him. Only silence. And in that silence, the magistrate, bound and bloodied, whispered a single word. "Brother." Aldrich froze. His knife slipped from trembling fingers, clattering to the stone. The word struck deeper than any blade. His face twisted, anguish warring with fury, love with hatred. Silas saw the fracture. He stepped closer, voice steady. "It's over, Aldrich. The mask is gone. The truth is all that's left." For a heartbeat, it seemed Aldrich might collapse, surrender to the ruin of his illusions. But fanaticism dies hard. His eyes flared, and with a sudden scream, he lunged, not at Silas, but at the magistrate, hands clawing for his brother's throat. The shot cracked like thunder. Aldrich staggered, blood blooming across his chest. He looked down in disbelief. Lillian stood with smoking revolver, her jaw set, her eyes cold. He swayed, staring at the magistrate, then at Silas. His lips curled in a final, broken smile. Silence wins, and he fell. The chamber was still. The zealots who remained dropped their weapons, their faith extinguished with their prophet. Only the crackle of fire filled the air. Silas stood over the fallen man, chest heaving, the metallic taste of blood on his tongue. He did not feel victory, only the weight of inevitability, the bitter truth that corruption was not slain, only unmasked. Lillian holstered her gun with shaking hands. The boy crept from the shadows, his wide eyes fixed on Silas. "What happens now?" the boy whispered. Silas looked at the corpse of Aldrich Vey, then at the magistrate who sobbed in his bonds. Spared yet complicit in his city's decay, he thought of rain falling on Blackwater streets, crimson in the glow of neon and fire. "Now," Silas said quietly, "now the city keeps rotting. We just cut away one mask." He turned, bloodied and weary, and led them out of the chamber, leaving silence behind. Outside, the night awaited, heavy, endless, hungry, and as the first drops of rain began to fall, dark and red in the haze of street lamps, Silas Kane walked into it. The crimson rain had not ended, IT had only begun.